Welcome, welcome, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever you are, hello. Over the years, I've come to regard myself as a kind person. This is part of the story that I tell myself about myself. In support of this proposition, I could say that I like to help my friends and family by offering them advice from time to time. Sometimes they even ask for this advice. It's possible that I enjoy helping people with their problems, not because my advice is very good, but because refusing to help would make me feel like a bad person. This would seem to contradict what I've spent years telling myself. In many cases, it's a lot easier to just offer friendly advice rather than wrestle with the inner turmoil of not doing so. That uneasy feeling tends to arise any time our opinions or values or beliefs are legitimately challenged. This could be a clash with another person, or it could just stem from discovering some new information. The mental toll of dealing with such a contradiction goes by the proper name of cognitive dissonance. And you can consider the rest of this episode friendly advice, freely given, for purely selfless reasons. I suspect we all enjoy feeling like we've done right by our fellow apes. Even though what passes for right and wrong, what moral scorecard we keep, is highly subjective. I, for one, try to acknowledge and welcome this kind of disagreement with open arms. This is because varying opinions invite discussion, and discussions allow for improvements in our thinking. Important issues, like abortion, animal rights, and giving to charity, are highly contentious because a victim or a villain is created whichever side of the fence you land on. Should we favour life or bodily autonomy? Is the well-being of sentient creatures or the taste of ham more important to us? And with only finite resources, which causes are the most deserving of our charitable donations? Whatever we choose, coming face to face with someone who opposes our particular stance can be unsettling. The belief that we are a good person becomes increasingly hard to maintain once the victim of our actions has been pointed out. The Netflix documentary Seaspiracy exposed a great many good people as hypocrites who have been paying others to ruthlessly trawler the oceans all their fish-eating lives. What should we do with this information? Accusations, or insinuations, that we are the villain of the piece often leaves us confused, upset, or angry. But why? If we've made a mistake, and someone is generous enough to point this out, surely we ought to thank them with a theatrical bow and immediately change our ways. If only. All too often we double down, and this warrants investigation. It may shock you to learn that problems don't always have a simple black or white answer. Ethical trade-offs provide some of the murkiest waters there are. But what happens when your solution creates a contradiction, where two of your cherished values are completely at odds with each other? Firmly believing in two things that cannot peacefully coexist creates cognitive dissonance, and it can be literally painful to admit. This problem is so widespread and so underappreciated, with such huge ramifications, I figured it was worth a wiggle soup all of its own. Here's a very real moral dilemma that I'm personally struggling with. I believe that people shouldn't deliberately cause animals to suffer, directly or indirectly, unless that person's own survival is at stake. In essence, if something is cruel and unnecessary, then it is immoral. In my opinion, this appears to be a rather straightforward general rule for people to adhere to. When someone convinces me that exploiting an animal for its bodily products is either not cruel or essential for our survival, then I'll happily abandon this belief. However, I also value ecological diversity and conservation, which creates a conflict of interests. Improving the health of native habitats often involves the shooting, trapping, or poisoning of invasive species that humans have historically introduced. Environmental restoration is an area where killing animals seems justifiable, even though it doesn't immediately affect human survival. Removing destructive mammals like rats, stoats, deer, pigs, and rabbits from New Zealand's wild forests, whilst championing animal well-being, gives me a sense of cognitive dissonance I can't deny. Ordinarily, the discomfort of cognitive dissonance is enough to inspire us to invent excuses for the errors in our thinking. The reasons that we come up with are often hastily cobbled together and attempt to explain our actions or limit our options after the fact to avoid responsibility. Really anything to keep us in a flattering light. Not to pick on anyone in particular, but smokers, for example, know that their habit is dangerous and expensive. The pleasures of smoking, despite its health risk, is bound to cause psychological unease. This can be soothed by claiming, "I'm irritable without it," or "all of my family smoke," or "I put on weight every time I try to stop," etc., etc. The reasoning behind a person's moral conviction can be just as wanting, yours and mine included. Moral dilemmas are notoriously tricky because our most popular ways of considering morality, namely deontology and consequentialism, offer competing instructions. Both seem obvious in different situations, yet have insurmountable problems when you follow them to the letter. Let's take these one at a time. Deontology asserts that our human morals are derived from a set of unerring truths that specify which behaviours are required, forbidden, or permitted. A deontologist might claim that "thou shalt not kill," and this would apply in all circumstances, everywhere, always. Euthanasia becomes a no-brainer. It's wrong no matter how terrible and terminal a person's condition. For this kind of moral agent, killing animals must entail some special pleading. Other strict rules, like "thou shalt not lie," are great if you believe that universal honesty will make for a better world. Cognitive dissonance arrives with a knock at the door. "Where is your husband?" asks the maniac outside. "I would like to kill him." It's a stretch to believe that lying wouldn't lead to a better outcome for everyone in this situation. For each deontological principle, only a single exception is needed to dismiss it as a sound moral framework. Consequentialism provides an alternative. A consequentialist recognizes these problems with deontology and instead claims that it's the consequences of our actions that matter, not strict adherence to a set of transcendent virtues. This way of thinking seeks to identify and maximize the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of individuals. An action that produces the greatest net good, or utility, is what we ought to do. So the joy of a bacon sandwich must be worth more than the life of a pig to be moral. And a thriving family of invasive possums should have greater value than the health of a forest ecosystem to be left alone. And here's where consequentialism runs into trouble as well. For starters, who knows what consequences an action might have way down the line? And the idea that our actions can be assigned a measurable utility, totaled to gauge how good the deed is, just doesn't work in the real world. Consider, is it better for 1 billion people to live happily on this planet, with all their needs met, or for 10 billion people to exist, with fewer resources shared between them? Assigning moral values to behaviours risks birthing a utility monster. If you suspect that an action, or an entity, has an intrinsic value, that is, it is a source of good in and of itself, then you'd be morally obligated to do more of that thing without limit. If happiness is what you value above all, then the suffering of the few can be justified as long as enough happiness is derived from it by the many. Or even vice versa. If pleasure is your utility of choice, then the worst excesses of sadism become mandatory as long as the pleasure of the tormentors outweighs the misery of their victims. And if life itself has intrinsic value, then creating more of it will always be a good thing to do. This seems to be the paradox at the heart of consequentialism. In reality, no matter what you value, doing infinitely more of it must yield diminishing returns. It's inescapable that both deontological and consequentialist mindsets were born from our collective moral intuitions. As no objective morality can possibly exist in the universe, there will always be some token cognitive dissonance to contend with. This is why moral dilemmas cause us such grief. And humans don't enjoy being proven wrong or inconsistent in their thinking, let me tell you. As a theory of self-justification, cognitive dissonance explains why this might be. The internal turmoil created from juggling two bits of incompatible information is as intolerable to us as hunger, tiredness, or cold. The sensation needs to be resolved, or at least reduced, for us to continue functioning properly. As with morals, justifications for bad decisions come much easier than apologies or admissions of guilt. If we can ignore evidence that suggests we're wrong, and cherry-pick only those facts that support our choices, any emerging excuse can't be labelled a lie. Not exactly. The practice is a useful, unconscious tool for protecting ourselves and keeping dissonance at bay. Dismissing or discounting new information that contradicts our prior beliefs is called a confirmation bias. Although this tends to be a pejorative term, confirmation bias may be key to holding our fragmented worldly information together. Whatever fabricated self-image we're trying to maintain, a belief that we are wholly unbiased seems almost necessary. Maybe this is why my criticisms to other people always feel so helpful and genuinely constructive. Jokes. An opinion will never be watertight until it's been scoured for cognitive dissonance first. Psychological experiments repeatedly show that our human brains would rather be coherent than correct any day. If every new piece of information caused us to rework our mental picture of the world, our species would have never mastered seafaring, to name just one thing. We'd get nothing done. Cognitive coherence will always be of utmost importance when making sense of the world, even if we end up defending some pretty flimsy beliefs in the process. The very worst cases of cognitive dissonance stem from information that challenges our unique sense of identity. Anything that supports our core values, pride, honour, or moral character will warrant a passionate defence. Astrophysicist Sean Carroll, whose brilliant Mindscape podcast regularly dabbles in the philosophical, uses the following cosmological metaphor. A person is like a set of beliefs that have stuck together the way a planet forms from rocks in space. Once stable, this new planet will defend itself against new incoming beliefs that might disrupt the peaceful landscape. We have to deflect these hazards to maintain the integrity of the planet we've created, and the greatest existential threats are those that cause the greatest cognitive dissonance. For this reason, forcing someone to confront a delusion, or something that they ought to have been more skeptical about, is always going to rock the boat. Cultural stories give us comfort. They are how we navigate our day-to-day lives, but they can make the effort of admitting we're wrong insurmountable. Instead, an offended party may instinctively defend themselves by dismissing all evidence that they were gullible. Everybody does this. Doctors, social workers, military generals, all want to believe that they are competent and making fantastic decisions. Everyone wants to believe that they are a good, worthy, smart person. So we've become adept at excusing our mistakes and continuing bad practices to maintain this illusion. It is quite the magic trick. What would you do if your moral, political, or religious ideologies were shown to be unethical, flawed, or hypocritical in some way? Our first reaction should never be rage, but careful, rational introspection. Easier said than done, for sure. Knowing how to act and doing so are very different games. But self-righteous anger is what keeps people doing and defending things that are immoral, ineffective, and outdated. Sadly, on planet Earth at least, both the good guys and the bad guys honestly believe that they're doing the right thing. Working out which side we're on will involve accepting a few inconvenient truths. If not, I suspect you're not being entirely honest with yourself. So is my commitment to veganism too simplistically deontological? Or do pest control efforts hinge on an impractically consequentialist mindset? Training ourselves to check for these epistemological weaknesses is the first step towards intellectual honesty, assuming that's something we value. Nobody achieves greatness by saying that all legendary thinkers of the past were correct. We improve by spotting their mistakes. Everyone holds beliefs that they've invested time and energy and some personal pride in. But that doesn't automatically make an idea true or worth further investment. When someone makes a mistake, particularly someone we're fond of, it's tempting to excuse their behaviour or downplay the consequences. We should notice how the time, energy, and pride we've invested in those people causes us to reflexively shield ourselves from the cognitive dissonance they've created. It would be better to separate the two, realizing that people are people and mistakes are mistakes, and one doesn't define the other. Our beef is usually with the psychological ruckus we experience, not the facts themselves. Understanding cognitive dissonance can help us relieve this internal conflict, empathize with others, and empower us to forgive, if that's what's important. At least, then, the problem won't be too little compassion, just where to direct it. Confirmation bias is just one of a whole suite of different mental shortcuts that we use to cope and function. So next, I want to look at a whole lot more of them. Because it's fun.